I remember the exact moment something inside me snapped. The moment I watched my aunt stumble out through the iron gate, clutching her suitcase like it was the last fragile piece of her dignity. The evening sun hit her face, and even from where I stood, halfway down the driveway, I could see the defeat in her eyes. Her in-laws crowded the porch like guards at a prison gate, arms crossed, chins lifted, their voices sharp enough to cut through the entire neighborhood. "She's been overstaying for months," her mother-in-law barked. "We've tolerated enough." I stopped mid-step, frozen, listening to them throw her name around like an accusation, like she was some unwanted trespasser instead of the woman who once held this family together. Neighbors peeked from behind curtains. A few pretended they were checking the mail, but their phones were already recording. My aunt, her voice barely steady, whispered, "Just one night, please. This is my home." Her words were swallowed by the sound of another phone clicking on. Her mother-in-law didn't even bother answering. She just shoved the suitcase forward, letting it tumble down the steps. It burst open on the concrete, spilling her clothes into the dust like trash being dumped on the roadside. A heat rose inside me so fast I thought I'd scream. The humiliation wasn't mine, but it seared through me all the same. My aunt reached down with trembling hands, trying to gather the pieces of her life. "Don't say anything," she whispered without looking at me. "They'll only enjoy it more." Her brother-in-law strutted to the edge of the stairs, holding a stack of old family documents. "You never deserved the house anyway," he announced loudly, throwing the papers into the air. They scattered like dead leaves, drifting across the driveway while the neighbors watched as if it were a spectacle. My aunt stood, trying to rush toward the living room window, toward the framed wedding photo she treasured. Before she could take 2 steps, the door slammed shut from the inside. The lock clicked. Final, absolute. Cars slowed as they passed. People leaned out of windows, whispering, "She finally got thrown out." I knelt beside her, gathering the papers that now lay stained with dust and humiliation. Bank statements, legal papers, her marriage certificate, and an envelope she clutched so tightly her knuckles turned white. "Come," I murmured, helping her to her feet. She didn't argue. She didn't cry. She just walked to the car with a stiff, broken silence, as if each step took something from her. She sank into the passenger seat, staring at the house through the cracked window. Her reflection trembled against the glass like she was watching her entire life burn down from the inside. Driving away felt wrong. Wrong in my chest. Wrong in my bones. Like leaving that house behind was somehow agreeing with everything they had done to her. Halfway down the street, she finally spoke. Her voice was nothing but a breath. "They think I'm powerless." That sentence hit me harder than anything her in-laws had shouted. It wasn't fear. It wasn't despair. It was a promise. A quiet, dangerous promise. Right then, I vowed silently, "I'll help you prove them wrong." At the next red light, she held the envelope closer to her chest, protecting it like a heartbeat. I didn't know what was inside. I didn't know what it meant. I didn't know it held the very thing that would rewrite everything. Her inheritance, her rights, her revenge. Growing up, I saw my aunt as the kind of woman who could swallow storms without letting a single crack show. She moved through life quietly, carrying burdens no one else bothered to notice, and still somehow found the strength to raise me after school, cook for the entire family, and make sure everyone else was comfortable before she ever thought of herself. Yet she always stayed in the background, as if she believed that being small made her safer. My uncle, her husband, had passed away 3 years earlier, leaving behind an unfinished will that no one could fully interpret. His family saw that confusion as an opportunity. Even at his funeral, I remember the way they whispered, circling the paperwork like vultures waiting for the weakest moment to strike. My aunt was still trying to breathe through her grief when they were already dividing what they thought would be theirs. She told me once, in one of her rare moments of honesty, that her entire marriage had been built on borrowed peace. Smiles shared across dinner tables hid the bruising words she endured behind closed doors. Every family photo looked perfect, but the spaces between the pictures told the truth. Her in-laws had never truly accepted her. When she married into that house, she thought she was entering a family. Instead, she walked into a battlefield where she was the only unarmed soldier. They resented her for being educated, for having a job, for bringing her own small inheritances into the marriage. They hated that she didn't need them financially, and they made her pay for that independence every single day. My uncle's habits didn't help. Late night calls, sudden disappearances, secretive bank statements. She never complained, but I saw the way her fingers tightened around her phone when he stepped outside to take a call. She lived in a state of quiet anxiety she never spoke about, not even to me. But her wounds went deeper than marriage. She carried scars from childhood, memories of being treated like a burden, told repeatedly that she'd always depend on others, that she'd never build a life on her own. The cruel words of her past echoed easily in the hallways of her in-laws' home. Still, she endured it all. For peace, for her husband, for the illusion of family she so desperately wanted to believe in. But then her husband died, and everything she had silently endured instantly made her the perfect target. Quiet, grieving, isolated, she had no children to secure her position, and they made sure she never forgot it. She failed the family lineage, her mother-in-law would whisper, just loud enough for my aunt to hear. One evening, long before the day she was thrown out, she showed me a hidden folder on her laptop. Inside were screenshots, voice recordings, copies of bank statements, years of insults, financial manipulation, stolen money, and attempted fraud. She had been documenting everything, quietly, methodically, like a woman preparing for a storm she knew would eventually arrive. But there was another betrayal she had hidden even deeper, one that she hadn't told anyone. Her husband had secretly changed beneficiaries without informing her. The man she loved had left her vulnerable without a warning, without a conversation, without a final chance to protect herself. And yet, the envelope she clutched the day she was humiliated contained something even her husband's family didn't know. A document naming her as the legal heir to her own father's land, a property worth millions. She had planned to use those papers to secure her place in the house, to show her in-laws she had her own standing, her own power. But grief had frozen her. She couldn't bring herself to wave wealth in the faces of people who had just lost their son. So she stayed silent, too silent. And when they threw her out that day, every old wound she had patched with polite smiles ripped open again. Childhood wounds, marital wounds, family wounds. The humiliation dragged them all to the surface at once. Later that night, she looked at me with eyes I had never seen before. "Humiliation," she whispered, "is a powerful awakening." And standing there in the dim light of my apartment, I realized something unmistakable. That day, she woke up. I drove her to my apartment, but the entire ride she stared at her phone, frozen, watching message after message explode across the screen. Threats, taunts, orders. Her in-laws weren't grieving, they were celebrating her fall, demanding money as if her heartbreak were just another bill to be paid. The glow of the screen lit her face, but her eyes looked hollow, as if everything she believed in had just slipped out from under her. That night, she cried quietly on my couch. Not because she had lost a house, walls can be replaced, but because she had loved people who never once loved her back. She whispered their names like they were ghosts haunting her, and every tear sounded like another piece of trust breaking forever. She spread the documents she carried, property papers, bank statements, her father's will, across my dining table, each page a fragment of her shattered life. It looked like a battlefield, ink, signatures, and betrayal laid bare. She hovered over them with trembling fingers, but something shifted inside her. When she finally lifted her head, I didn't see pain anymore. I saw fire. They want war, she said, voice low, steady. Then I'll show them what war feels like. The next morning, she contacted the lawyer who had handled her father's estate. His reaction was instant: shock, disbelief, then a slow, calculating clarity. The property transfer her husband completed before his death had left her far wealthier than her in-laws ever imagined. The very wealth they were trying to steal was already legally in her name. By afternoon, rumors started spreading online. Her in-laws twisted the entire story, painting her as a manipulator thrown out for misbehavior. Screenshots flew everywhere. Strangers judged, relatives called, their voices dripping false concern, warning her not to create a drama. They wanted her silent, ashamed, erased. But each call only hardened her. She didn't bow, didn't break. She listened, hung up, and grew sharper. At the bank, reality hit even harder. Hidden accounts, transfers, secrets her husband had tried to fix before he died. Her in-laws had attempted to access those accounts illegally the very day they pushed her out. The lawyer pieced together the clues her husband left behind, a breadcrumb trail of protection he prayed she would one day understand. I stood beside her when we gathered CCTV footage from neighbors. One elderly neighbor pressed a USB drive into her hand like it was contraband. "You'll need this," she whispered, eyes full of anger that wasn't hers but borrowed for my aunt's sake. Then one afternoon, her mother-in-law called. No hesitation, no shame, just cold, calculated cruelty. "Sign away your claims," she snapped, "or we'll finalize matters legally. You have no place here." My aunt didn't argue. She didn't cry. She didn't explain. She answered with silence, heavy, deliberate silence. And that silence terrified them more than any threat ever could. The tension climbed in the days that followed. Her in-laws began messaging distant relatives, trying to build alliances, preparing for a legal attack they assumed she couldn't survive. But every night, under the quiet hum of my apartment lights, we worked. We drafted documents, labeled recordings, sorted timestamps, built a timeline of every insult, every threat, every bruise on her dignity. She wasn't just preparing a case. She was preparing a comeback. And as she tightened every file and sharpened every truth, I saw years of weight sliding off her shoulders and settling into her hands no longer trembling but ready to fight. The turning point arrived when we least expected it, a late-night phone call slicing through the silence of my apartment. My aunt, half asleep on the couch, reached for her buzzing phone with the sluggishness of someone who expected nothing but more pain. But the number on the screen froze her completely. A number she hadn't seen in years, a name she hadn't dared hope would return. She answered with a trembling hello, and the moment she heard his voice, her husband's old friend, the one she trusted before her in-laws pushed him out, her breath broke. He sounded shaken, almost ashamed. Then the confession spilled out in a rush he had been holding back far too long. Her husband's final conversation with him had been about protecting her, about undoing the damage his family caused, about making sure she would never be left vulnerable again. Her husband had planned to amend his will, restore her as the primary beneficiary, and block his family from touching anything that belonged to her. He had been determined, desperate even, but death had reached him before the legal process could be completed. Then came the reveal that changed everything. The friend whispered, "I have a digital backup of the updated draft. It's legally admissible. He gave it to me in case something happened." My aunt pressed a hand to her mouth as he sent file after file, emails, recordings, handwritten notes scanned into PDFs, everything her husband had entrusted him with. Proof that his last act was love, not neglect. Proof that she had mattered beyond measure. She didn't cry from heartbreak this time. She cried from finally knowing she had been cherished, protected, and defended, even in silence. That night, the balance of power didn't shift with noise or chaos. It shifted with a quiet brutality that felt like justice taking its first breath. The next morning, we sat across from the lawyer. He opened the files, his jaw tightening, his eyes sharpening with each page. "They don't realize," he said, voice low and deliberate, "that by throwing you out, they committed multiple offenses: public humiliation, illegal eviction, attempted property fraud. This is no longer just emotional cruelty. This is criminal." My aunt lifted her chin, her posture transforming inch by inch. She wasn't returning as a discarded widow. She wasn't returning as the woman they tossed into the street. She was returning as the legal heir, armed with her husband's intent, evidence that couldn't be twisted, and witnesses ready to speak. Together, we drafted the legal notice, and every word felt like thunder pressed into paper, loud even in its silence. Before we left, the lawyer leaned forward with one final recommendation: a public hearing request. It will force them into accountability under the community association. They won't be able to hide or twist the story anymore. My aunt's lips curled, not in softness, not in gratitude, but in the sharp, fierce smile of a woman who has risen from ashes with her crown intact. For the first time, she wasn't afraid. For the first time, she wasn't alone. For the first time, she was ready. The legal notice went out at sunrise. By the time we finished breakfast, my aunt's phone was shaking non-stop. Calls from her in-laws, from unknown numbers, from relatives pretending to check on her. Every voice carried the same panic. "Let's settle this privately," they insisted. "No," she replied, her tone cold steel. "Everything will happen legally." The community hearing was scheduled in the neighborhood hall, the same place where people had watched her humiliation like spectators at a show. This time, they would watch something else. Her in-laws arrived first, heads high, shoulders stiff, dragging a crowd of loyal relatives who muttered insults under their breath. They expected fear. They expected tears. They expected the same woman they threw out. They didn't expect the woman who walked in next. My aunt stepped inside wearing a soft pastel suit, her hair neatly tied, her files arranged with surgical precision. She didn't glare. She didn't flinch. She simply walked to her seat with a calmness that made the room hold its breath. I sat right behind her as the lawyer opened the case. The first thing he played was the CCTV footage, projected on the big screen for everyone to see. The shove, the suitcase hitting the floor, the insults, the neighbors staring, the crack in her voice when she asked why they were doing this. Gasps rippled across the hall. People who once whispered against her now stared at the floor, unable to meet her eyes. Then came the financial evidence. Screenshots, bank logs, signatures forged so poorly they almost looked childish. The lawyer laid everything out: their attempts to access her husband's accounts, the property documents they had hidden, the transactions they tried to manipulate. Her mother-in-law leapt up, shouting, "She deserved to be thrown out. She disrespected our family." The panel pounded the table. "Sit down." Silence fell like a verdict. Then the lawyer opened the final file, the digital will draft, her husband's intent, his emails, his instructions, his voice recordings. The room erupted, chairs scraped, people whispered. Her in-laws' faces drained color so fast it looked like the blood was fleeing them. Her brother-in-law tried to storm out, but the panel ordered sharply, "Sit down." When the room finally quieted, my aunt rose, and she spoke. She narrated her story without a single tremor, each insult, each manipulation, each betrayal laid out in clean, sharp sentences. She didn't dramatize, she didn't beg. She simply told the truth, and the truth broke the room open. By the end of her testimony, there was no debate. The community voted unanimously in her favor. Legally, she became the rightful owner of everything: her father's property, her husband's estate, and the house she was thrown out of. The final blow came from the court. Her in-laws were ordered to vacate the house within 48 hours. And my aunt stood at the gate 2 days later, watching them pack the same bags they once threw at her feet. No gloating, no cruelty, just a quiet, towering dignity. Her mother-in-law approached her, eyes swollen, voice cracked. "Please, don't do this." My aunt looked at her unblinking and said, "You taught me how to treat people who throw family out." Then she turned away, stepping into the house that was hers, not because they allowed it, but because justice finally did. The day she stepped back into the house, sunlight poured through the windows like a blessing finally allowed to reach her. She paused at the doorway, breathing in the air she once feared would suffocate her, and stepped inside with the quiet certainty of someone returning to her rightful place. She moved through each room slowly, touching the staircase railing, the cool living room wall, the curtains she once ironed while swallowing insults. Her fingers trembled, not with fear, but with ownership. Every corner she reclaimed felt like a wound closing. I helped her place her belongings back in the bedroom, watching her fold her clothes with a calm I hadn't seen in years. The room no longer felt like a battlefield. It felt warm, open, hers. Neighbors who once watched her humiliation from their gates now approached hesitantly, offering awkward apologies, baskets of fruit, soft words. She accepted them with quiet nods, offering neither bitterness nor triumph, just distance. She didn't celebrate. She didn't boast. She rebuilt. She hired contractors within a week, instructing them to repaint walls, replace locks, redesign the kitchen. Every hammer strike, every coat of fresh paint erased the shadows left behind by people who treated her like she didn't belong. At night, I noticed something different. She slept. Deeply. Peacefully. The lines on her forehead softened. Her nightmares, once constant, faded until they disappeared entirely. With part of her inheritance, she funded a women's legal aid program. Her way of breaking the silence that had trapped her for years. It was quiet, deliberate revenge, a message. No woman should fight alone. Her in-laws kept trying to contact her. Calls, texts, relatives sent as mediators. She blocked them all without hesitation. She returned to work, dressed with a confidence that made heads turn. Her colleagues noticed the change, admiring the steadiness she carried now, the strength she didn't need to announce. The legal cases continued in the background. Financial misconduct, illegal eviction, attempted fraud. The law was no longer used against her. It stood beside her. Ciao. She reconnected with old friends she had abandoned under pressure, laughing in ways I had never heard before. Not small laughs, full ones, free ones. She rebuilt her life not with anger, but with power. And as I watched her stand on the balcony one evening, smiling at the sunset over the home she fought for, I realized something. She hadn't just reclaimed a house. She had reclaimed herself. The home that once symbolized her pain now reflected her victory, a quiet, unshakable triumph. I faced the camera, the warm afternoon light brushing against the framed photo of my aunt sitting quietly behind me. Her smile in that picture feels like both an ending and a beginning, and I steady my breath before speaking. I recount everything in first person, the humiliation she endured on the street, the silence she held inside her chest for years, the moment she finally broke, and the fierce rise that followed. The words feel heavier spoken aloud, but necessary. I tell the viewers how easily family can weaponize love, how the people you trust the most can twist loyalty into leverage. And I stress how important it is to know your legal rights before someone convinces you that you don't have any. I describe the moment she knelt on the driveway gathering her scattered papers, how that single moment of humiliation transformed into absolute clarity. That was the instant she decided she would never beg again. I talk about the late-night phone call that shifted everything, the unexpected truth that arrived from a voice she hadn't heard in years. Sometimes I say, the people who bring justice into your life aren't the ones who share your blood. I reflect on watching her reclaim her home, how she stepped through the doorway with quiet strength, how she reclaimed not just the space, but her identity, her voice, her self-worth. I look straight into the lens and emphasize, being thrown out does not mean being powerless. Sometimes it's the shove that awakens your strength. I highlight the importance of documentation, of saving every message, every receipt, every whisper of evidence. Legal preparation is not dramatic, it's survival. And emotional courage is what carries you through the worst of it. I encourage viewers to stand up against quiet abuse, especially the kind that hides behind the word family. I tell them they don't have to wait for permission to protect themselves. I remind them that justice may be slow, may feel distant, but when it arrives with weight. I confess how her story changed me, how watching her rise from the ground up taught me that dignity is worth defending, even when your own voice is shaking. I let the silence stretch for a moment, letting the weight of her journey settle between us and the screen. Then I say the line that has lived in my chest ever since her victory. If you're going through something similar, let this be your reminder. Your comeback can start today. I invite viewers to share their stories in the comments, offering space for those who've been silenced for too long. And then I end with a gentle CTA, soft but steady. Subscribe if you want more real stories, raw, emotional, and empowering. The video fades out on a shot of the house's front door, new paint, new locks, and her name proudly shining on the title deed.